right down at the bottom of the screen in the center. But without further ado, let's just turn it over to Steve Wilson, who is going to take us back to South Africa. And you're already there, Steve.
I am. I'm in Lubanzi's cellar room. So welcome. South Africa is an area that I absolutely adore. A lot of people say you go there once and something gets planted in your soul and it continues to grow, and the only way you can satisfy it is by returning. So it's an amazing place for thousands of reasons. I mean, beautiful scenery, amazing food and wine, amazing people. Animals. I mean, it's kind of funny to be walking in a vineyard and suddenly notice that you're being stalked by a leopard or something. It definitely is unique in the amount of wildlife that interacts with the wine farms. But wine has been something in South Africa for a good while. The town of Cape Town was originally set up as a kind of a refueling point. It's around 1655, somewhere in there. Shortly after it was established, grapes got planted. I mean, it wasn't too long, maybe 20 years, and wineries started showing up in and around Cape Town. There's a region called Constantia that sits right at the base of Table Mountain, kind of the prominent feature of Cape Town. And then if you travel further north, you get to Stellenbosch, and we've done a tasting with some wines from Stellenbosch in the past. Today, we're going to go up the western coast to an area called Swatland. And Swatland is fairly rustic. There's not a lot of I mean, there's ecotourism. And actually that's a prominent feature in this particular winery story. But ecotourism, most of the population centers not in that area. But Swatland is a beautiful place, fairly dry, perfect for growing grapes. Grapes like to struggle a little bit. Amazing soil. Most of the wine farms are dry farmed, so they just rely on the rains that come, and the grapes get used to that. But this particular project is cool. It was started, I want to say 2014, by two guys who were exchange students down in South Africa. When they finished their program, they took a little backpacking trip, and the Western coast is known for their backpacking trails, and so they were hiking along the ocean, kind of along the bluffs above the ocean. And I think it was day one. It was about a 7-day backpacking trip, and day one, a dog started following them. And this dog actually stayed with them until the night before their last night. So the dog stayed with with the two of them as they made this trail. And when they got to the end, they were telling the story about how this dog just joined their trip. And the locals said, "Well, that's Lubanzi. Lubanzi lives on the trail. He just moves back and forth, and he kind of takes a liking to different groups, but that's Lubanzi." So they named the wine after Lubanzi. These two guys really wanted their wine project to not only make great wine. I mean, obviously that was a key component, but there was a very strong interest in social responsibility, improving the lives. I mean, their idea is that this bottle of wine should benefit everybody involved with its production, not just those at the end of the chain. So the growers, they work with local farmers, and have and their all of their operations are fair trade certified. They portions of the sales go back to there's a it's called the Pebbles Project, but it's a nonprofit that is geared toward improving the healthcare and early education access to farm workers and to the locals who are producing these grapes. So a portion of the proceeds of these bottles go toward that. They give back 1% of their profits to environmental projects, because obviously this part of Africa is one of the most environmental biologically rich places on the planet. It's one of the 5 floral kingdoms. So they do a lot to kind of return to the community. They use the designer. I love the labels on these bottles. It's a young graphic designer in Cape Town who they came across, I think, at a bar, and really liked his work, and so he now has a job. So the guys, and I've met one of the partners, and he is very much concerned about, again, first and foremost, making great wine, but also benefiting the communities that it serves. So I think with that, we will start with the first wine. The first wine is a white. It is a grape called Chenin Blanc. Chenin originally, we've determined, evolved from the Loire Valley in France, around the village of Anjou. It made it to South Africa. I mean, it's not, again, not surprising given the amount of trade that went from Europe to South Africa for, hundreds and hundreds of years. We don't exactly know how it got there, but once DNA testing became prevalent, it would, in the 90s, it was discovered that a grape that South Africa had grown there for centuries, that they called Steen, was in fact Chenin Blanc. So this grape has grown here and grown here very well for a long time. So this is Chenin Blanc from Swatland. Chenin is a great, I love Chenin. It has this sort of apple, pear, stone fruits, peach, apricot kind of thing going on. Great acidity. The soils in this area have a lot of granite in them, and so there's a kind of a vibrancy reflected in the wine. Delicious richness, like nice ripe fruit, but the last thing that happens is your mouth waters. So it's an amazing food friendly wine. You'll find these at, Cape Town is packed with outstanding restaurants, and being next to the ocean, actually 2 oceans, they are able to serve quite the bounty of sea dwelling fare, and Chenin loves that, but a very food friendly wine.
Steve, would you please show us the label?
Oh, yes.
We had a request.
Yes. Let me see.
Yeah, it might disappear.
Oop. Let's see. Hold on.
It's a ghost. I'll go get mine.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it does not want to. Wait a minute. There we go. Maybe. That's crazy. Yeah. So what else to say about Chenin? Again, great food wine. And this particular bottling, I think I've had probably every vintage of Lubonsi since they started. And I will say early on, they were good. they still had some issues to work out with. They've really in partnership with all of the growers, and they don't own their own property. But they have very, very close ties with what are called wine farms, kind of as the name implies, vineyards that are owned and managed by individual families. So they work very closely with these wine farms. They in pest management, in how the vines are trained and trellised. In fact, these actually the Shenan actually comes from a fairly old vineyard that is both dry farmed but bush trained. So a bush trained vine kind of looks like a tree that you lopped off at the base and then just leafed out. So it's got a very thick base, and the vines the grape clusters stay fairly close to the ground and are able to absorb heat, because even though this area is, people think of Africa as being very hot, this area sees a dramatic diurnal shift. So even when the days are 90 plus degrees, it still may drop down to 60 at night. So there's a dramatic diurnal shift, and where this part of the growing region is a little more sheltered. The Western Cape gets a little more influence from the ocean. Well, yes, the Western Cape, right near Cape Town. The Western coast has a little more mountain ranges that block some of the moderating temperature. So bush training is kind of a strategy to keep those grapes a little closer to the ground so they are able to continue ripening. Yeah, I love this wine. And we can talk about any questions that people have about this one, or we can move on to the next one.
Well, Kathleen was going to share. I have this little machine that speed chills wine. It spins it around in water. So my label's looking a little sad right now. It kind of got wet and ripped up.
Yeah, here.
So Kathleen has it.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
Perfect.
cool.
Yeah. Well, and the other very cool thing about Lubonsi is that they've adopted a lot of technology that is not traditional. I mean, the South African wine industry is very is fairly unknown. I won't say it's not unknown, but it's known on a very limited basis in the United States. South Africa actually produces more wine than we do by volume. Most of it goes to Europe. A lot of it stays on the continent because there are very few wine growing regions in the continent. So South Africa does provide African wine to the rest of the continent. But so a very old region, a lot of very traditional kind of ideas. One of the things that these two guys and again Americans brought to the table was, what if we put this wine in cans? And so Lubonsi is actually available in 12-ounce cans, so about a half bottle of wine, which makes it very portable. And the clientele that they go after, if you look at their social media, is a lot of people, younger people out hiking and at the beach, and again, places that you wouldn't ideally want to take a glass bottle. But even to that extent, they realized that traveling with a corkscrew was maybe not the greatest thing. So they used cork. The cork closure can be removed with your hands. So they've done a lot of things that are, from a very old region, very modern techniques, and they've really done a great job with this. This is, as I said, I've tasted most of the vintages from the project, and the first they still had some issues kind of to deal with. They definitely have hit their stride. They have a great winemaker now working full-time for them, and they've really established their relationships with the growers. So the link between the grower and the winemaker is it's a very tight bond. But and again, I really, there are a lot of wineries that have social causes, and I like that about the wine industry. South Africa has, a lot of issues historically, and making sure that the community that produces the wine can maybe even afford to drink the wine, that's important. And at the very least, making sure that the community that produces the wine is benefiting. And so the projects that they're involved with, I mean, a lot of the wineries in this region do have similar programs, very, very cool programs. One that when I was down there last visited, every employee that they hired from a township, and every employee they hired had to learn 3 jobs while they were employed with the company. So they would rotate them. They wanted them, at the time that they left the winery, they wanted them to know, well, you know how to fix a tractor, and you know how to work on the receiving line, and you might even have spent time in the tasting room helping customers. So those skills travel with the employee, and that kind of proactive approach to improving the lives of the people involved with making the wine, that I very much appreciate that and respect that.
Steve,
All right.
you said
Yep.
in your notes
Okay.
that both of these wines were seasonally friendly. And
Oh, yeah.
so I was just thinking of food pairings, my mouth is watering. So it's Christmas Eve. What am I going to eat?
Well, roasted, I would say roasted chicken and pork with like Shenan. Fish is a given. It will love fish. Sausages, but pork and chicken, a little bit lighter proteins, delicious. Cheeses, amazing. Turkey, this is a classic turkey wine. It just has, it has a lot of fruit, which is really nice in food pairing, but it has acid, and acid is essential for really, really pairing with food. It kind of loosens up the taste buds and helps particularly deal with any fattiness. The fat kind of washes off, because fat, obviously kind of glazes our tongue and at times kind of shrink wraps it. And so acid kind of washes that away and resets the palate. And so it's very nice. But Chenin is a very fruit. I mean, it's great by itself. That's the nice thing. It doesn't need food. And it has a little more body than maybe some lighter wines. I mean, this is still a great summer wine, but it has a little more body, a little more weight in the mouth. And that I think makes it, as the weather gets a little cooler, that kind of matches that theme. But no, as a food wine, there's very little that this would not work well with.
And then what about the chill factor? And I think we talked about this once before, how certain white wines taste better, not quite so cold, and others, I mean, what is that rule of thumb?
Well, it's really a case by case thing, because I pulled this out of my fridge. My fridge was probably 39 to 40 degrees, and had a glass immediately. And I loved, I mean, it was showing a lot. The acid was delicious. I didn't feel that it was too cold. And as it's warmed up, I still like it. I think I like this one maybe as warm as, I mean, out of the fridge for 20 minutes is 30 minutes, I guess it's probably been. I would say this is as warm as I like it. I mean, it really is. It's a preference thing. In this case, I don't think it loses anything by being colder versus warmer. Some wines just close up. I mean, it's almost like you just stick a glass plate over the top and try to smell through it. It just doesn't work. But this one, I think it's very comfortable with a little cooler temperature.
Great, thank you. Oh, Janie says clam chowder New England style with this wine.
Mm-hmm.
Good idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, no,
Good
I mean,
idea,
it has, so in that case, it has a weight that's not, if you had something I would say Sauvignon Blanc, really sharp, bright Sauvignon Blanc. That's a little, I would say, too sharp for the clam chowder. The acid level is gonna accentuate. I mean, it's gonna be accentuated by the creaminess of the soup. But this one has a softer body, a little more rounded nature, and so, but still acid. And so, with the cream base in the clam chowder, yeah, I like that. Very nice.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on to the red. Also from Swatland. And one of the things that South Africa has, I would say, learned through experience is that Rhone varietals, so grapes that are native to or commonly found rather in France's Rhone Valley in the south eastern part of France. It is so that would include Syrah, Grenache, a grape called Carignan, a grape called Mourvèdre, some other whites, Viognier, but the Rhone varietals, white and reds, do very well in South Africa. It's similar climate, granitic soil, so they're similar soil structures, but Syrah particularly does, I think, very, very well. I like the Rhone varietals from South Africa, I think, more than I like the Bordeaux varietals. They certainly make great Cabernet and Merlot and Cabernet Franc, but the Syrah and the Grenache, I really think they do quite well. So this is a blend, and in the region of the Rhone Valley, they are typically blended. It's mostly Grenache, followed by Syrah. The Grenache gives it kind of a vibrancy. The Syrah gives it a little richness, fuller bodied, but the wines pair very well. The grapes, because they grow so well in this area, also retain the kind of the natural chemistry that allow the wines to age. So these wines hold for a nice, I mean, 5 years, they're going to continue to improve and I mean, even at kind of the entry level lines, these wines are going to continue to improve and evolve. But yeah, let's taste this guy. Oh yeah. So one of the there are a number of styles that this wine can be, this blend can be made in. Some of them are more classic, a little more earthy, rustic, if you will, lighter body, lighter alcohol, again, maybe a little more funk. And then there's the other, which is, and I would say this is more of an international style. So very fruit powerful, fruit forward, lots of fruit. I mean, you can smell it in the glass, you can taste it on the palate. Plums and cherries, a little bit of spice, black pepper, but this kind of very lush profile is kind of referred to as an international style. Does very well with food, particularly anything with grill marks, steak, obviously delicious. Lamb chops is a classic pairing with this blend. But even things like pasta with red sauce. I mean, it's very versatile. South African cuisine is fairly broad. I mean, there are things that both from the land and from the water, and their wines are commonly served with both. So really nice richness. But this really reflects where I hope South Africa is going, because it has, I mean, this is the oldest dirt on the planet. The soil really is the most or very close to the most important characteristic in growing grapes. Climate matters a lot, but soil and how that soil drains water and what it encourages the grapes to do That's where quality comes from. And this soil is the oldest on the planet. It's amazingly complex. And so to have this wine made by nature, basically, it's the very best way. There, science, humans can't do this kind of work in a lab. This is nature, and then humans just kind of shepherd it into a bottle or a can in this case. But I think that we will see probably more South African wines in the market. There are a lot of areas in the world right now that are dealing with supply issues of all sorts, everything from glass and cardboard to simple labor. There are a lot of issues that are kind of affecting that, but the quality that South Africa has, the fact that it can ship product to both North America as well as Europe, I think we're going to see a lot more of South African wines in the American market, particularly just because the quality is there.
Scott Morgan has a question. Can someone tell the style of a wine by looking at the bottle? Is it just by reading the description?
No, actually, no. That's actually a great question, because the answer is yes, but it's subtle, and because so when you look at this bottle, anyway, when you look at the bottle, it's fairly, I mean, it definitely was, the label was definitely crafted by a graphic designer, and it features sort of edgy graphics. It's definitely not a classic label. You would not find, a bottle of Bordeaux marketed this way. So the audience that it's targeting is really somebody who is maybe as concerned about, say, the interesting story and maybe the social responsibility aspect of the wine as they are what's in the bottle. And so this is a very new world package and very international kind of package, and the wine reflects that. I mean, the closure is not standard. The label is not standard. The fact that they do cans, not standard. So that really, I mean, part of their success probably relates to the fact that they identified what the consumer was looking for, what their consumer was looking for, and then they engineered the package to be that way. And so, yes, I mean, if you grab a bottle of Bordeaux, if you grab a bottle of Bordeaux from an old chateau, the label has the picture of the chateau and very formal lettering, and it's a very classic standard label. You would expect that to be more of a classic style of wine. And I mean, they don't always correlate that way, but if the winery is well marketed, they will think about that. They will want their packaging to match. Yeah, there we go. They will want the packaging to match the audience's expectations. And this is, it's sort of edgy. It's very visual. If you move the bottle around, you can find different little references to things, stories, and whatnot. There's a lot going on, and it's engaging. And the audience that is, they want this bottle. The audience whose hands they want this bottle in would be somebody who would be attracted by that. So yeah, no, style and packaging really should correlate. So I would say, I mean, that probably as far as the most obvious reference about whether it's old world or new world, I mean, unfortunately, you smell it. I mean, you have to smell it, but kind of the classic styles are going to be a little more earthy, a little more nuanced, a little less flashy out of the gate. And may require a little more contemplation. Not always, but modern international style is very much about, lots of fruit, barrel spice. Subtlety is important, but not as important as it is to the classic producers. They want you to like kind of what they're going after. And so no, I mean, I'm always intrigued with how wine is marketed. And I think they did a great job. The wine matches, the package matches the wine. And that's important. Yeah, good question.
So this cork isn't, you're not supposed to use a corkscrew on this.
You don't have to.
You don't have to, but you could.
You could, but the idea is, and they solved the problem with the cans, but the idea was if you're going to the beach and you want to have a bottle of wine with you and you forget the corkscrew, the day's ruined. So this doesn't, this runs that off. There's no problem with forgetting the corkscrew. And the can is brilliant. It really, I think, and we talked a little bit about packaging last time, box wine. Canned wine is the same thing. The vessel does a great job at preserving the wine and transporting it. It really does. The downside is there's a shortage of cans and lids. So we'll see where that takes us. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
So Cap has a question. You mentioned that these were entry-level wines.
Mhm.
What is your definition of entry level? And does Lubanzi have a second level wine as well?
I guess when I say entry level, everyday wine, not so much entry level. Statistically, the kind of the sweet spot in the American market is between $10 and $15. That's kind of where the American market buys their everyday wine. Although interestingly, during COVID, that trended up to 20, 25. It was a surprise to the industry, but that information is now kind of flowing in. Lubonsi doesn't have a upper tier yet. It would not surprise me if they did, only because there are some really, really highly respected producers in Swatland that are doing, and they're not like Napa Valley wines. I mean, Napa, for example, wines in Napa have to be expensive because there's an immense amount of cost in simply producing them. In Swatland, land is less expensive, labor is less expensive. Where you run into issues are things like shipping. But I mean, it's, Cape Town has been an international shipping port for like 500 years. So they've got most of that figured out. Wow, just flew out of my brain. Anyway,
It happens.
hopefully I answered the question. Yeah.
No, you did. Yeah, and everybody feel free to put your opinions in the chat too. Uh-oh.
So is there an ideal temperature to serve this at? Should it be slightly chilled or room temp or?
I would say for red wines, having not chilled but cool, maybe say 60 to 65 is a nice temperature for reds. That is a good area. It keeps the alcohol kind of constrained, and as a red wine rather typically has higher alcohol levels. So as it warms up, more of that alcohol evaporates and you notice it more. So red wines, the nice thing about weather right now is that you just stick it outside for 20 minutes and it probably get the temperature that is really ideal.
Does anybody else have any just comments? I guess one observation I've had is that it seems to improve flavor wise the more it breathes, this particular wine.
And that that's largely due to, as I said before, this area has great success in growing very high quality grapes, and one of the attributes of a really good grape is that it has chemistry that will preserve its qualities. And I mean, there's a lot of science that goes into that, but these grapes grown in this place do have that. So the biggest, yes, definitely the biggest enemy to wine is oxygen. It's needed in some extents to get it to smell and taste like we want it to. However, too much ruins the wine and starts its progression toward, if we're lucky, vinegar, but if we're not, something that goes down the drain. But these grapes have natural chemistry. So the fact that it takes a little while to open in the glass is a reflection of it doesn't want to oxidize, which is, again, a good thing. I like, that's another attribute of this wine. You know, you can, what you don't finish today, you know, put the cork in the bottle, stick it in your fridge. The refrigerator is the best place to store wine, regardless, red or white. You don't want to consume it out of the fridge. The reds particularly, they really shut down at that temperature, but it will preserve it. But no, this bottle, you know, stored in the fridge will last several days before it's starting to show serious flaws. And that's the chemistry of the grapes.
Cap had another question. What have winemakers done to make red wine more approachable at a younger age?
Well, that's a cool question, because there's been a lot of evolution in that area. I mean, when my business partner and I started selling wine, say 20 years ago, it was not uncommon to taste, say, a wine from Bordeaux, and you'd taste it and it was delicious and you knew that it was going to be something great at some point, but when it was released was not that point. And part of that was just the climate that say Bordeaux was experiencing at the time. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were certain technologies that didn't exist. One of the coolest technologies, and I love being in wineries to see like what sort of gadgets and gizmos have been invented. One of the coolest technologies, if the winery can afford to purchase one, it's called an optical sorter. And it basically is a computer that scans each individual grape and compares it against pictures of physiologically ripe grapes and decides whether that grape is ready, is optimally ripe or not. And so if a green grape shows up as the grapes are coming into the winery before they're crushed, a little puff of air will shoot that grape off into a bin. And it's not even just green. I mean, they can be just slightly pink. The computer will recognize that that's not a ripe grape that needs to be removed. So for wineries using, say, optical sorting technology, they have removed a green quality to their wine, a quality that would have taken more time to evolve, to soften, because that greenness, that underripeness needs time. And if you remove that from the product, it doesn't require as much time. There are other technologies that they've discovered. I mean, certainly, you know, back in the day, fermentation tanks, for example, the temperature was not regulated. Well, now we figured out, well, we can put very, very accurate lines that circulate cooling liquid, because during fermentation, it gets fairly warm, and that temperature increase can change the wine. And so now, I mean, probably I would guess that the tanks behind me here have glycol cooling lines in them, so that the temperature of the fermentation is very well controlled. And so when that goes into the barrel, it's ready-er, I guess you could say. So there there are a number of different techniques. Introducing oxygen, low levels of oxygen during fermentation. It's called microoxygenation. That kind of moves the process along. They've also, I mean, it really is just mind blowing. They've even figured out that certain yeast strains do better jobs of converting sugars, and so you can have using just a different yeast strain, you can get a product that is better or more approachable sooner. So there are a lot of techniques that are used today that simply didn't exist 20 years ago. So yeah, whereas we had to, as wine buyers, we would have to kind of strategize. Well, this we'll buy this box today, but we'll sell it a year from now or 2 years from now because it's just not ready. Most wine, the vast majority of wine that shows up in retail or at a restaurant or from the winery directly, they have determined it is ready. It is ready. It is approachable now. It does not need additional time. It may improve, may not all wine ages, but the opportunity for it to be enjoyed at its release, that using technology that has improved drastically, dramatically.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Scott that says, I don't remember discussing aerating wine on here. Given that oxygen is an enemy of wine, what are your thoughts on it?
So I should say it's an enemy of wine through prolonged exposure. It's kind of, you can't, the absence of oxygen would mean the wine would not smell or taste like anything, because those things occur through oxygenation. It's when you kind of hit that critical point where now the wine is oxidized, and that smell is sort of pruny, maybe almost like sherry, but it is seen too much wine. With respect to aerating, it definitely is a useful thing. I'm sort of lazy when it comes to aerating, so I will just pour a glass of wine, give it a swirl, and maybe walk away from it for 20 minutes, just because I don't want to clean a decanter. I will say decanters, they do a great job aerating. It's awesome presentation. The devices that are sold where you pour, and I won't name the specific brand, but you pour it through and it gurgles and it comes out. I don't know anybody in our industry who uses them. It was a very well marketed product, and there's a lot of equipment in the wine industry that sounds really cool, but it doesn't, it's not tinfoil hatty, but I would rather spend, say, $30 on another bottle of wine than $30 on an aerator. So I would say aeration is important. Your glass usually can do the job. If your glass can't, a decanter will, but you probably don't need anything else other than that.
Great. I like the transcription that the aerator came out as a narrator.
Yeah.
I thought that was a lovely touch. One question, and this probably reverts back to what you're talking about, acidity with the white wine is, are there certain types of wine? How do you know whether a wine is going to be acidic or not? Is it, Cabernets are less or more? How does that, not Cabernet, but how do you know that?
So actually Cabernet is less.
Is it? Okay.
In fact, sometimes it has issues with being too low. But the best way of thinking about what acid does for a wine is if you think about, say, Coca-Cola, glass of Coke, with the bubbles in that, you have acidity that takes something that's very sweet and lightens it up a little bit. you remove those bubbles and flat Coke is almost undrinkable. It doesn't have anything really that inspires you to want to guzzle flat Coke. Acid does for wine what bubbles do for Coke. We taste a lot of wine where acid is missing and the wine tastes, I mean, we would say that the wine tastes flabby. It tastes, it doesn't have anything carrying the weight. And so it kind of sits on your tongue and it doesn't do much. So there are issues with having not enough acid in wine. There are grapes though and typically they're grapes that like cool climate regions. So Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, definitely. Pinot Gris, or Pinot Grigio. Those are whites that very much like cool weather. Chardonnay is sort of a mixed bag because Chardonnay can grow in a lot of different regions, not always that well, but it will grow in warmer regions, but it generally requires acidification in the winery because it doesn't get it naturally. And I'm a big believer that if you can let nature do the work, you end up with a better product. So back to, I guess I would say there are great varietals that have acid in their profile. Again, the ones I mentioned. There are also other strategies. I mean, if you want more acid in your wine, go to cooler regions. I mean, Oregon, for example. Oregon really doesn't. I mean, Willamette Valley in Oregon really can't make big sloppy wines. They don't have the weather that allows that to happen. So their wines, Pinot Noir. I mean, it's a beautiful wine and it's carried by great acidity. That's what makes Pinot so beautiful. It has brightness, and you can definitely find examples where that brightness isn't there, and it usually is a warmer climate, maybe a less suitable climate for growing that particular grape.
I think that there are a couple of us that were taken by your descriptor of flabby wine.
Yeah.
So Shelley is asking, how do wineries acidify flabby wine? Or do they?
Well, sadly, they tear open a bag of tartaric acid or malic acid and they dump it in. That's how it's acidified. My ideal wine is one that nature made the vast majority of. There's certainly things that I mean, adding. So if you're making a white wine and it doesn't have enough tartaric acid, adding a little powdered acid. I mean, it's a pure form of tartaric acid. So there's nothing else other than tartaric acid. I don't think that's horrible. If you take a wine that has no acid and you're now acidifying it to make it acidic, probably you're not going to fool that many people because you're not adjusting, you're compensating, and small incremental corrections are one thing, but I mean, I've tasted wine where really nature made almost none of it, and they're horrible. They taste clumsy. They taste fabricated. I don't even know how to describe them. They taste strange to me. But that is where way too much corrective chemistry has been taking place.
So Shelley has a follow-up question of, is there any requirement for winemakers to report when they use additives? That's an awesome question, because that is actually a debate that's going on in the wine industry, has been for about 10 years. Why aren't wineries required to put ingredient labels on them, on their bottles? They're not. And in fact, the reason, and this is awful, the reason that doesn't exist is because people would be stunned. There are certain wines, very popular wines, where
the list of chemicals in those wines would baffle people. I mean, it might even baffle scientists. I mean, there are things that, I mean, it's kind of, it's a tough issue because there are certain things that are very common and natural, but nobody knows their chemical their chemical name, you know, and wineries would have to call out, well, okay, so this is this, but it's really a naturally occurring acid that shows up in green apples. It would require descriptive, additional follow-up, I guess. However, there are wineries. One of my most favorite wineries on the planet. It's a winery. They have locations in both Sonoma and in Santa Cruz. The winery is called Ridge, and the winemaker Paul Draper has been fighting this battle for probably 10, 12 years. He just started volunteering. He's like, I'm going to put. I mean, he sells wine that ranges in price from maybe $30 to $300 a bottle. And on every single bottle, he will put every ingredient that went into that wine. Now, Paul's lucky because he makes really great wine and he knows how to grow and manage really great vineyards. So his wines have mostly ingredients that everybody has heard of. But there are certain wines, again, mass marketed wines, where the grape juice is really just the kind of the chemical foundation, and everything is added. I mean, coloring. Now it's a confusing world, but there are grape coloring additives that are grape based, but not used by anybody but mass producers trying to disguise their wine. So there's actually a lot of stuff. I mean, I would say if you're concerned about what's in your wine, organic and biodynamic farming is great. The reality is the best producers do it whether they're certified or not. They know that letting nature make their wine is the best way to do it. But if you're concerned about what's in your wine, the best thing I would say is make sure your wine is made by nature and not a factory. If Modesto is the address of the winery, it's not a winery. Modesto is home to a lot of wine factories.
Hey, that's a good tip. Cap, did you have a question? I didn't know if you were holding up your hand or not. Yep, I think you're muted. Oops. Okay. Well, actually, hang on. Let's see. All right. And Cap just says, thanks to Steve Wilson and the lovely host for this meeting. And I guess I'll leave you with this question from Amy, asked with humor: if we already have an aerator that gurgles, is it bad to use it now that we've wasted the money?
Oh, no, it absolutely is not. Gurgle away. Yes, no, keep using it. But it is doing something that has a benefit to the wine, but probably not the benefit that the producer of the gurgler wanted or promoted. But absolutely keep using it. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, with that, why don't we all unmute and we could give Steve a round of applause, and thank you so much, man. Another informative session. This is fantastic. So
thank you all. I very much enjoy this. I hope you all did as well.
Yeah, it was great. So got 2 more great wine selections to use with our holiday dinners. So we're excited.
Yeah, very, very, like I said, very food friendly. Like roast beef, outstanding with this Lubonsi. Just meats and cheeses at a an open house. Great wines, fantastic wines.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll catch you at the next session, which will be in January.
Thank you so much.